It's about 45 minutes a day that people are spending as a result of the toggle tax. And so the question is, what could people do with that time if they weren't doing this? And universally, the feedback that we get is an asset manager or head of desk will say, I want my traders more involved in the investment management process. I want them sitting down with the PM, giving trade ideas, coming back with perspective of what's working in the market, identify opportunities, right? If it's a sell side desk, they want them spending time with the research team in the morning to figure out what materials they have that they can go out to clients. They want them spending more time talking with customers. If it's wealth management, they want them actually preparing for client meetings, doing more outreach. They want them taking out that 9% of just friction overhead and shifting it to the highest end of the value stack and saying, now you have the time and the mental freedom to do higher value work.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Grizz Griswold with FINOS. Hope you're doing well. Today, I have Dan Schleifer with me of Interoperability. Dan, say hello. How are you doing?
Good, Grizz. I'm doing really well today. It's a beautiful, warm day in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Good. And what is warm here in London, UK as well. I wish you were here in the next week. You aren't coming to London, are you?
Unfortunately not. I know I wanted to be there for it, but I brought my spring travel schedule to a halt and basically said no more. I cannot get in an aluminum tube again. So I'm going to miss this one, but I will, of course, be in New York, which for the fall event. So looking forward to that.
Very good. And I will be there as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And if readers have not caught this by now, Dan and I have known each other through FINOS for at least, I think the first time I actually met you was in London in 2021, right after COVID, and we were struggling to keep masks on. I think it was during a conference for the first conference that the Linux Foundation did after everything in 2020. So it's good to see you.
In fact, that the first time we met in person was then, and it was that weird. You guys were like the first conference that I attended post-COVID, and certainly I think probably the first in the industry. So I was like Linux Foundation's first, and it was that really weird period of time where the rules or just social norms were so different. And so you go to a US airport, you had to have your mask on the plane, you had to put the mask on, you land in London, no one's wearing a mask. But then you go to an event where there's going to be a lot of people and you have to answer a question here or kind of provide all your contact tracing details. It was do we fist bump? Do we elbow bump? Do we hug or do we shake hands? It was a very awkward time where we were kind of becoming human again.
Exactly. And then I also still remember the fear of, okay, I'm going to take this test and in 3 days, I'm going to find out if I'm allowed to leave the country. So
that right, you to test before you're allowed to come home.
Exactly. And then does alcohol kill all the COVID? Dan and I have known each other for a little bit, but Dan, I've never had the opportunity to really sit down with you and find out about you and find out about your path. Are you just a business person? Are you an engineer? How did you come to start Interop.io? Were there things before that? I do know that. But I would really like to hear about what led you to where the position that you are now.
Sure. So just a business person. That's rough. Yeah. So it's been an interesting journey. So I didn't come from the finance space originally in my career. So I started actually in enterprise information security of all places back in the .com kind of boom era and have been working basically for enterprise software companies ever since, generally startups and growth stage companies. So I started my career as a pre-sales engineer and then moved into product management. I was in product management for a long time and eventually left and started my own company back in 2021, and it was called ChartIQ.
Right.
And hopefully everybody that's listening has heard the name ChartIQ, but if not, ChartIQ was my co-founder, Terry Thorson, and I's business to build HTML5 JavaScript libraries that were specific to kind of financial charting. So things like technical analysis for pre-trade, trade reconstruction in the post-trade space. So really high performance, industry specific tools, which at the time, circa 2011, 2012, people were starting to build applications in web technology. But honestly, in the financial space, both retail and institutional, most of what people interacted with was kind of legacy desktop software, .NET, Java, C++, or if it was on the web, it was being built in things like Silverlight and Adobe Flex, those kind of RIA frameworks that were being used for interactive applications. So we started building ChartIQ really just as the financial industry as a whole started starting to seriously look at using web technology to build business applications. And it probably wasn't until 2015 or so that the institutional space, if you were with E-Trade or Yahoo Finance or somebody like that, you were delivering web technology. But if you went into the institutional market, everything was still either desktop based or if it was on the web using those kind of proprietary frameworks and not using web tech.
So that all predates FINOS, and that all predates the work that came together on open source and finance. And so if you do not know, and you're listening to this for the first time, that there is an open standard called FDC3. And I do want to get into that because I know that's the direction we're going. You say that you're not from financial services initially. There was something though that I feel in the roles that you said that you had before you started your own business, they sound very solution oriented. And, can you talk about that and maybe like, what was it personally that drew you to start to build ChartIQ? What was it that is continually driving you into the next phase of what you're working on, what your company's working on with FTC3? Again,
the interesting bit there for me from a career path standpoint, right, as somebody that was kind of on that intersection of tech and business, right? So pre-sales engineering, product management, these are roles that kind of straddle the technology and business realms. Right. So you've got salespeople who, are exclusively maybe on the business side. You've got engineers who are more exclusively on the tech side. And then you've got those roles like product management that straddle the two. And the interesting bit there is understanding enough of how technology works and how it's built and what it's capable of, but also enough from the customer and the business standpoint to know what problems they have to be able to come up with kind of practical applications of that technology. And perhaps starting with ChartIQ, it was really around understanding the technology, kind of this generational transformation cycle that we were in, moving from one tech stack towards another, and knowing that people were going to be re-platforming and building things, and to understand what the technology, just at the bleeding edge of what JavaScript and HTML5 was capable of, could do, and how that might become mainstream years later. And if you skip forward a few years into the ChartIQ era of 2015, 2016, as we were getting adopted by more asset managers, hedge funds, sell-side banks, et cetera, that's when you really saw these organizations in the institutional market struggling to adopt new technologies like ours. They wanted to build a best-of-breed workflow environment for their users. They wanted to adopt great new technologies like ChartIQ and all the other kind of fintech solutions that were out there. But that's really when we saw the integration issue and the fact that people weren't willing to accept another system that wasn't integrated into the workflow. And it wasn't because they didn't tolerate the idea of a siloed workflow. It's that they already had too many. Right? Their market data terminal didn't talk to their OMS, didn't talk to their risk system, didn't talk to their chat system, didn't talk to the CRM system, didn't talk to all of these different things. So the idea of one more browser tab, it was just a straw that broke the camel's back. And so that's when we started developing what was called FINOS, which was our desktop interoperability platform in 2016, and we launched it in 2017. And it was really around that real-world problem that we saw with customers from ChartIQ trying to adopt new technology. And again, having that, I think, balancing act of what's the customer problem and what is the technology capable of to bring a practical solution to it. And so that's where I entered the desktop interoperability space. And so that's the time that we joined FINOS. Sorry.
Okay, right. No, and with that, can you I've had each person that's talked about FTC3 for the past 4 years on this podcast. There have not been that many, but Chris has, and we've had a couple of other speakers as well. Can you define desktop interoperability, how you understand it, and maybe the business value of desktop interoperability as well?
Yeah, I mean, desktop interoperability is quite simple. It's how do I connect the applications I have to build seamless workflows between them. So most people listening to the podcast will have some familiarity with Bloomberg, let's say. And inside Bloomberg, Bloomberg offers dozens or hundreds of different tools and applications and components, and they all talk to each other because they're all from Bloomberg, right? If I set up my Bloomberg Launchpad, I put everything exactly where I want it. I configure it. I link them together. So if I update one, the others update. I set everything up exactly how I want. Everything is seamless. But that's all because it's within that single Bloomberg ecosystem. And they're really good at that, right? At building workflow between the different applications or components inside Bloomberg. People know that, they're familiar with it. Desktop interoperability applies that same user experience, but to a best of breed application strategy. To say, I want to have a Labby or Charles River or whatever is my order management system. I want to use FlexTrade or Azure, whatever it is, my EMS. I want to have this as my market data solution. I want to have these different tools that I build in-house that are proprietary to my trading strategy, my portfolio management strategy. And being able to create that workflow so that I set up my screens the way that I want them. Monday morning, my screens come back exactly the way that I had them before. If I click on away in my order blotter, I want these three systems to update and I want Bloomberg to go to this command, where I have my notifications from all the different systems that I have that are trying to get my attention constantly, blinking and beeping. All of those go into a centralized notification center where I have a single place that they're all actionable, where I've got a single global search box to be able to search across all those things. So you can think of it as that user experience of the big monolithic all-in-one solution, but it's made up of whatever set of components. If they're, legacy technology, they're modern web technology, you built them in-house or you bought them off the shelf, you can have that kind of heterogeneous mix, but with the streamlined user experience. So that's kind of what desktop interoperability is. The second part of your question was, well, what's the value in solving it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's traders and heads of desk all the time, and I ask them, how many different applications do you have? Like, close your eyes, picture your desktop across all your monitors. How many applications do you have open? And depending on who they are or what asset class, 5 to 15. Great. Yeah. How many browser tabs do you have open that are work related, right? Not your Facebook feed, but like work related browser tabs. And they'll say another 5 or 6. Great. So you've got anywhere from, not great with math, 11 to 21 different applications. And how many times do you have to copy and paste and switch and toggle between them? And what if you want to look for something? How many different applications are pushing notifications? People recognize the pain of that. They just are used to it as the frustration and the friction in doing their job.
Right.
And what's interesting is everybody knows the problem. They often don't know there's a solution. And then the question is, how do you quantify the value of solving it? Because it's not about making a trader or a PM or an analyst life better. I mean, in the end, people don't spend lots of money just to make Grizz happy, right? They do it because there's business value. I would, Grizz, because I love you, but
I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And there's stats that we have, right? So we have clients that come to us and say, hey, our RFQ response time is 45 seconds and we want to drop it down to 30 seconds. Across the sell side equities desk, here's the amount of our volume that we're able to cross versus send out to market. If we can shift this by 5%, we'll make more of a name in these stocks and we'll get more flow, and it's more profitable to do crosses across customers than it is to send it out to market. So sometimes it's based on very specific workflow stats. According to Harvard Business Review and other sources, the toggle tax, as it's known, is generally about 9% of somebody's time. So that's the amount of overhead and friction just switching between applications to do your work. There's also some interesting, besides the kind of 9%, some interesting data around the cognitive load that's put on people.
Yep.
Right. So they're pushing people to make quick decisions, bring a lot of insight, and you're adding all this complexity, and it actually drives up cognitive load, which makes people make poor decisions more slowly, and leads to burnout and dissatisfaction. So if you look, just to simplify, you look at that 9% of a person's working day, it's about 45 minutes a day that people are spending as a result of the toggle tax. And so the question is, what could people do with that time if they weren't doing this? And universally, the feedback that we get is an asset manager, head of desk will say, I want my traders more involved in the investment management process. I want them sitting down with the PM, giving trade ideas, coming back with perspective of what's working in the market, identify opportunities, right? If it's a sell side desk, they want them spending time with the research team in the morning to figure out what materials they have that they can go out to clients. They want them spending more time talking with customers. If it's wealth management, they want them actually preparing for client meetings, doing more outreach. They want them taking out that 9% of just friction overhead and shifting it to the highest end of the value stack and saying, now you have the time and the mental freedom to do higher value work.
Yeah, I like that. And it's the strategery, I guess, that you are giving back with those 45 minutes. And that's why somewhere in there I mentioned like copying and pasting as well. To me, that seems to be part of the switching tasks.
Yeah, it's income trader the other day who can't even copy and paste because one of the applications doesn't let them actually select the text. They end up having to write it down, switch application, and then retype it. I was like, how often do you make that mistake? And they were like, more often than you would care to, I would care to admit. But Grizz, you brought up FDC3, which is the industry standard that lives inside FINOS, and it's worth us going there for a minute because this whole idea of desktop interoperability and we're turning that time to users so that they can do higher value work only happens if it's technically possible. And FDC3 has been a driving force to make this possible. So it's worth maybe taking a minute to even talk about what FDC3 is.
And also talk about how the difference between a project and a standard from what you've seen as well. So yeah, I mean, you're the expert and go.
I'll start with what FDC3 is, and I think talking about open source versus open standards is really important too. So interoperability is really unique in its approach that instead of doing bilateral integrations, you do kind of one-to-many integrations. So Grizz, in the past, if you went to your IT team and said, I want you to connect these two applications, they would either go to those vendors or go to the internal teams, and those two application development teams would go back to the servers, right? So you've got a user interface, they go back to the servers, they either stand up an API if they have one, if they don't have one, or use an existing one. Somebody would write a bunch of server-side code to connect to those two APIs. So that when I press a button over here, some data goes back to the server that goes over an API to some middleware that connects to another API that goes back to the thing. And at the end of that, right, what is a long, expensive process, you've built a one-to-one integration. And that's brittle. Anytime somebody changes an API, that breaks and you have to redo it. And the more kind of bilateral integrations you have, suddenly you have this kind of a spider web or a rat's nest of integrations. And it's a lot of technical debt for people to carry on. And so as a customer, when you go to your OMS vendor, you go to an analytics provider and you say, hey, I want you to integrate with this. They tell you, oh, we'll put that in the backlog that sits there for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months because it's very expensive for them to do. They have a lot of these to facilitate. So the idea behind FDC3 is quite powerful. It's quite simple, but powerful, which is to say that if everybody kind of speaks the same language, right? If every application provider conforms to this very simple FDC3 standard, that we can connect in a one-to-many environment through an interoperability framework, all of the applications. So when I was ChartIQ, we adhered to the FDC3 standard, which meant that anybody that had implemented interoperability could drop ChartIQ in, and then suddenly ChartIQ could speak to all of the other applications. And ChartIQ didn't have to know who those applications were, right? What technology they were built in, whether they were in Azure or AWS or an on-prem solution, it didn't matter. We just had to support one API, the FDC3 API, and it solved that whole integration problem for our clients. If that's kind of the beauty of FDC3, I often liken it to FIX, right? Before FIX was 15 years ago, connecting to a venue was, again, bilateral, very expensive, different standards. And while FIX is by no means perfect, it has become the simple, cheap, easier way for us to connect with a lot of different venues. And so we're doing it for venue connectivity and connecting an OMS to an EMS to a venue for straight-through processing. We're doing that same kind of approach, but for desktop applications. So it's a different use case. The protocol's a bit different. It's architected differently, but it's that same kind of approach.
So I think maybe I'm drawing things that I know about this, and I think I can understand if I am working on this standard, why you'd want to be involved.
Yep.
But it, but if I'm an application vendor and my app can talk to any of the other apps, but any of the other apps can talk to my app and any of the other apps, what value is there for me as an application vendor to get involved either with the standard or conform to the standard? Is there any value?
If you are like ChartIQ was, so a point solution that does a very specific thing, you're a post-traded FX TCA vendor, or you're a pre-trade equities, but whatever it is, you're, again, like ChartIQ, we call those spokes, right? They're a part of the workflow. They're never going to be the center of the workflow. It means distribution, right? It means that you can drop into an asset manager, a hedge fund, sell-side bank, a wealth manager, whatever the case may be, and plug and play out of the box, right? You're a Lego brick that client can snap in. Frankly, the biggest impediment, again, going back to my own experience at ChartIQ, was not convincing somebody that they should try your application, that your application is great. It's about how long does it take for them to get up and running on the desk. And that could take 6 months, 12 months. If we can shorten that down to minutes because things are plug and play, as a vendor, that's a very powerful thing to be able to go out and say, hey, stick with your OMS, stick with whatever you've got, stick with your in-house thing. You don't need to integrate me in. I can just be sitting off to the side and we'll communicate back and forth, doing that kind of side-by-side integration. And then if you're the big legacy providers who are kind of the center of the user's universe, right? You're the OMS, EMS market data terminal, right? It's about how do you build an ecosystem around you? I think these vendors consistently have been talking about a mental shift that they've made over the past five, maybe 10 years, but we'll say 5, around recognizing they can't be everything to all people, that their customers are always going to want to use different applications for different things. They're never going to provide 100%, right? Even Bloomberg, being Bloomberg, doesn't provide 100% of what somebody needs. They still have all these other applications. And so by being an open integration hub, by being able to say, hey, we're the center of your workflows, your OMS, EMS, but now you can bolt on all the different spokes around that hub, that's really valuable to them. So there's value both to kind of the small upstart point solutions, but also to kind of the big legacy incumbents.
And thank you. Now, back to the open standard part of things. And can you define what an open standard is and why it's useful? I always want to go back to where's the business value of this? I can see the technical value all day long, but I think you already kind of said some of it beforehand, but I'd like you to restate it as the standard that we're talking about.
Yeah, so I think the name FINOS is great, and I'm a big fan. I would never suggest that you guys do a rebrand, but it's not just open source, it's open standards as well. And so open source, I think, gets a bit of the headline, right, in the name and a lot of the attention, and well-deserved. I won't get hate mail from Gab. Open source is fantastic, right? Everybody contributing to an open code base. I'm a big believer in it. But open standards are different, right? Instead of the software itself being open, we're saying, hey, each of us is building our own software.
All right.
But again, like Fix, we need a way to communicate with each other. We need to agree on a protocol and a language that we're going to use. And so the example of Fix, I think, is well placed, where the venues, the EMS providers, the OMS providers, they didn't need a single platform. It didn't make sense for them to have a shared open source core. They each had their own things, but what they needed was a standard language to connect them. And open standard behaves in a lot of ways from a governance standpoint, like an open source project, where you've got lead maintainer, you've got contributing maintainers, then you've got an open group and working groups that work on different things. And we've been honored to have our own Dr. Chris West kind of leading the FTC3 standard, but it's notable that our competitors participate, right? So our competing interop providers out there participate in the open standard. The buy side participates, the sell side participates, and the vendor community, the people that make the OMS, EMS platforms, the people that make those point solutions, everybody's participating towards this common goal to say, hey, we can create value for the business, value for the vendors, value for everybody involved if it is easier to connect things together. And so we're all looking in our own selfish interest, but towards a common goal. And so I think it's a beautiful thing to have open standards. The sausage making, as it were, is can have nobody wants to see how it's made necessarily, right? The guys who have dedicated a lot of time individually will attest to that, but the outcome is fantastic. And it is one of these situations where, like I said, we each are operating in our own selfish best interests but that drives collaboration together. And so I think it's a thing where we identify that we're all served well, the buy side, the sell side, the vendor community, in participating in these open standards.
Your company is, here's my selfish point of view. Your company is upgraded from a silver membership to a gold membership. And would you like to go into, and I'm not asking you to do a commercial for FINOS. That wouldn't be the point here. But within the scope of the work that your company does, one, what would be the reason for upgrading? But two, like, why would you want to be part of this community in the first place? Like, FTC3 doesn't necessarily have to exist within the FINOS ecosystem, but it does. So I'm just wondering if there's some value that your company has seen personally, whether it was ChartIQ, whether it was Interoperability, to playing in this pool, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, and I in my introduction myself, I didn't tell this part of the story, which is that my company created this product called Finsamble. We were fierce competitors with a company called Glue42. Glue42 was also a FINOS member and also participated in the same open standards, right? And I talked about competitors collaborating together, and that was very much the case with us and our direct competitor. And then a year ago this month, we merged together. So Finsamble and Glue42 merged together to form Interoperability. And so the irony is that, again, we were fierce competitors, but we collaborated together around the FTC3 standards because it was good for us, it was good for the community. We've decided to upgrade our membership from silver to gold, frankly, because we recognize how important FINOS is in the industry, right? It created that space where as two competitors, we could come together and achieve something that was good for us and good for our customers and good for the industry as a whole. And we've been supporters for a long time. I think my company first joined FINOS, I think back in 2017. It's been a long time. And we continue to get value from it. And I think, to your point, FTC3 doesn't have to exist in FINOS, but FINOS creates that framework and kind of the neutral playing ground where all of these people can come together and collaborate on something. And we see value in that, and we contribute, obviously, through our membership, but also in a large amount of time and resource that we put into driving the standards forward and participating in FINOS events. And so it is a big commitment from us as a 130-person company, but we do see it as really important for us and for the community and transformational in that way. So FINOS has been good to us. We try to be good in return.
Thank you. From FINOS, from Gab. I know he's probably said with you directly.
Yeah, everybody else. But yeah, I mean, I think this is an industry that prior to FINOS didn't have this kind of thing. Again, there was the fixed standards body, but it's been transformational in the way that organizations are adopting open source and open standards. And we choose wisely where we put our money. We're not a bulge bracket bank who, is members of lots of organizations. And so we do, and you don't have to be a member to participate in FTC3. I mean, I think that's worth noting. If you're on this call and you're not a member of FINOS, you can still participate in the standards group, and you should. But we think it's important to make, for us, given what we do and the importance of FINOS to our industry, to really be a sponsor.
Again, thank you. And I think thank you too to two competitors, again, coming together and seeing the value in each other and seeing the value in collaboration, seeing the value and working within the community in order to, I've said this a couple of times to a couple of members, but it's not about altruism, but it is about doing good and making something good so that you were actually helping provide a standard that becomes, I liken it to a platform so that there's a bigger ecosystem. There's an ecosystem in FTC3 that exists within the bigger FINOS ecosystem. And it's been very interesting to watch since I came in the end of 2017. So Thank you to all you folks for pushing and driving this forward.
Yeah, I don't know how Gab will react when he listens, but like, it is not altruism on our part, right? It is doing good by doing well, whatever the expression is. Like, that's the fascinating part, and why I think it's so important to the community is that you have competitors who were both spending their time working together because it was in each of our respective best interests. And FINOS created that framework, and being able to do something that is positive for your competitors and for your customers at the same time that it's good for you is very much a rising tide lifts all boats, including your own. And so it's been great.
Good. Well, thank you, Dan, for today. Thank you for the work that you and I was about to say your country. That's wrong. Your company for so many years. And I know that I think Chris is speaking in London next week. Yep. And so I'm looking forward to seeing your crew there. Looking forward to seeing your crew in New York at the end of September and beginning of October as well. Looking forward to seeing you. And by the way, I do want to do a shout out to Anna in marketing. She's always been there whenever I needed like a quick, like, hey, am I crazy? On some things too. And she catches my mistakes, which I think is actually a good thing because we need that in marketing more. So you've got a great crew. I appreciate you being members, but I appreciate you being good stewards within this community.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Grizz. And enjoy your weekend in London. Have a great time. And to Grizz's point, unfortunately, I won't be there, but look for the guy with the beard and the fun mustache. And that's Chris West. And he's brilliant. And pull him aside and chat with him if you haven't met him before.
Definitely. All right. Thank you, Dan. And with that, I'm going to say good day, good night, wherever you are.